So in this video, I'm going to share the 6 biggest takeaways that I got from reading this book right here, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. So the 6 takeaways that I'm going to share have completely changed my perspective on money and how I plan to manage my own money moving forward. If you haven't read the book yet, then be sure to stay tuned because these 6 takeaways will not only help you see how your own behavior might actually be holding you back, they're also going to show you what you should be doing to make sure that you're on the right track to building long-term wealth. So the first takeaway is that none of us are crazy. What Morgan is trying to point out when he says this is that every single one of us have made and will continue to make financial decisions that to other people seem completely absurd, but to us, they seem totally rational. And the reason that some of us look at other people's financial decisions as irresponsible or just outright reckless is because all of us come from different backgrounds. Some of us were born into different economies and different parts of the world, experiencing different cultures. Therefore, we have different values. We've experienced different job markets. We have different degrees of income. We're motivated by different things. And when you look at all these different variables, it really starts to explain exactly why we all behave so differently with our money. There's actually a really interesting study that demonstrates how people's investment decisions are actually strongly influenced by their experience in their early adulthood. And the study shows that individuals who got low returns during the stock market recession in the 70s were significantly less inclined to invest in the stock market in the future. And on the flip side, just a decade later, you have those who went through one of the biggest bull markets in US history, and as a result, they end up with a very positive perception of the stock market. One of the things that really stood out to me about this study is the fact that the only difference between these two groups of people is the timing of their experience. When you look at people in the 70s, you see people who have a pretty pessimistic view of the stock market, and then just 10 years later, here comes a group of people who have a really optimistic perception of the market. And again, the only difference between the two is 10 years, which really isn't that long, but the fact that it impacted them that much that they were less likely to invest in what's clearly a bull market really says a lot. I think studies like this really reinforces the point that none of us are crazy, and while we should probably think twice before passing judgment on somebody else's financial decisions, because something that makes complete sense to me may not make all that sense to you, but at the end of the day, neither of us are crazy. We just have our own subjective views on money that have been influenced by the things we've experienced. If you and I were having a debate about who was the GOAT of the investing world, you would probably say it's Warren Buffett. And there's a part of me that wants to agree with you, but there's also another part that would argue that he's not the greatest. And hear me out, because I know the 22 annual returns he's been averaging since 1965 is impressive, but how impressive is it when compared to the 66% annual returns that this guy has been averaging? Doesn't really seem all that impressive, right? Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, you got a point. Who the hell is this guy? And if his returns are that great, how come you've never heard of him? Well, this is Jim Simmons, and he's the CEO of a hedge fund called Renaissance Technology. And since 1988, somehow this guy's been averaging 66% returns. Like, someone's really got to explain those kind of returns to me, because to have $120 billion under management and be able to average 66% annual returns on that, either this guy is really that damn good or...
Stop the cap.
All right, on a serious note though, how is it possible that Simon, who's been averaging 44% more than Buffett, still has a net worth that is 75% less than Buffett? Well, that leads us to the second biggest takeaway, and that is the power of compounding. See, there is a specific reason why Buffett is so much wealthier than Simon despite having the lower returns, and that reason is time. One of the things that many people don't know about Buffett is that he started investing when he was only 10 years old, and he was already a millionaire by the age of 30, which would be equivalent to around $9 million in today's money. So Buffett had a considerable head start on Simon, so his wealth has been compounding at a much longer rate than Simon. And as of today, Buffett is 93 years old with an estimated net worth of $118 billion, and Simon is 85 with a net worth of $37 billion. But here's how having more time would have helped Simon. So Simon had found his stride in his 30s and had the same 60 years of compounding that Buffett did, but with the same 66% returns, Simon would have a net worth of, hold on, I had to write this down because it was a really, really big number. So he would be worth 16 quintillion, 87 quadrillion, 378 trillion, 592 billion, 219 million, $234,304. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of money. And just to give you guys a little bit of context as to how much money this is, with that much money, he would be able to pay off the $34 trillion debt that the US has over 470,000 times. Like, that is an ungodly amount of money. At the end of the day, both of these guys are obviously incredible investors, but the key takeaway here is that taking a long-term approach to investing is what gives your investments the time it needs to reap the full effects of compounding. If you're the type of person who views wealth building as something that can only be accomplished by either making more money or getting better returns on your investment, then you might actually be setting yourself up for disappointment. Because if you really think about it, these two factors aren't necessarily within your control. What is within your control, though, is how efficient and how frugal you are. One of the things that Morgan talks about is the fact that wealth is simply the accumulation of whatever's left over after you spent what you take in. And he also argues that anyone can start building wealth despite having a high income, but that it's only achievable if you have a high savings rate. This is one of those chapters I wish I could have read in 2012 when I first joined the Marine Corps, because I joined straight out of high school and I never had a job before that. So the moment that I joined and started collecting a steady paycheck, it was game over. I was pretty much blowing my money on all this stuff that I wanted growing up, but I couldn't afford. And it wasn't until my second enlistment when I started getting my act together and started saving almost 50% of my paycheck. And within 1 year, me and my wife managed to save just over $45,000. And ever since, we've continued to maintain a very high savings rate. One of the things that really helped us with this was just shifting our focus from the short term over to the long term. And as a result, we ended up spending less money, which obviously lowered our expenses. And instead of spending that extra cash on, like a vacation or something, we either invested it or saved it because, for us, we have a desired outcome that we want in the future. Another thing that Morgan argues against is this idea that you should only save when you have a specific reason to. He makes this argument that you should simply save for the sake of saving, because we live in a very unpredictable world where just about anything can happen. So by saving, we are essentially hedging against life's inevitable ability to surprise us at the worst possible moments. One of the things that I noticed from talking to a lot of Marines when I was still in was that a lot of them had this tendency to only focus on the tangible things that money can buy, while I used to think a lot more about the intangibles, like being able to retire early, not having to accept the first job offer that comes my way, being able to take as much time off as I want, or even being able to make a career change like I did. There's obviously an unlimited number of tangible things that money can buy, but I would argue that sometimes the intangibles can be worth more than the tangibles themselves. But I'd like to know what you guys think. So leave a comment down below and let me know if you guys agree with that or disagree. But if you're currently not saving because you don't think that you have a reason to, then I would encourage you to reconsider that and even challenge you to save a lot more. Have you ever purchased something just to realize a few months down the road that you no longer have a use for that product, and instead of just letting it collect dust on the shelf somewhere, you decide to post it for sale, and despite being used, the product is still in excellent working condition, so you set the price according to what you think is fair. However, everybody who reaches out to you to ask about the product always wants to offer significantly less than what you have the product listed for. Tell me that's not one of the most frustrating things to deal with. People who want something for nothing. See, when it comes to investing, we all to some degree want something for nothing. We would love to be able to have the high returns without the volatility and uncertainty that comes from the stock market. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And the world we live in, a price must be paid. So let's say you wanted to buy a $30,000 car. You could either pay the $30,000, find a cheaper option, or you could just steal it, which I definitely don't recommend. And I'm sure that most of you guys know the consequences for choosing number 3 definitely doesn't outweigh the benefits. So when it comes to the stock market, if you want the high returns, there's a price to be paid, and that price is uncertainty and volatility. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't have a very high tolerance for risk, then you can always go for option number 2, which would be equivalent to accepting lower returns because of the reduced volatility. Now, just like there are those bad characters who are willing to choose option number 3, there are also those who want the high returns without paying the price. And there was a study that tracked the performance of these people. The study tracked 34 tactical funds whose whole strategy was to switch between stocks and bonds at the perfect time. So they essentially thought that they could time the market and just switch over to bonds when volatility was high and back to stocks when volatility was low. The only issue with that is it's pretty much impossible to time the market, and the results definitely reflect that. So over a 10-year period, the average tactical fund only gained around 2.3% per year. And to add gas to the fire, 22 of the 34 tactical funds that were part of this study didn't even make it to the end of that 10-year period. And if you're wondering why, it's because they literally all went under. The study concluded by saying that these tactical funds sell themselves on this promise of being able to successfully predict the market, but the only thing they've done is underperform more common strategies like the 60-40 strategy, where you have a portfolio that's made up of 60% stocks and 40% bonds. What's funny to me though is instead of just paying the price and dealing with the volatility and uncertainty, these fools ended up paying double. After reading reading this book, I think one of the best things we can do is shift our perspective of market volatility uncertainty. Instead of looking at it as something that we have to avoid at all costs, we should look at it more as just a fee that needs to be paid in order for us to stick around long enough for our investments to work out in our favor. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to identify somebody who's rich versus somebody who's wealthy. Let's take Floyd Mayweather, for example. If you type his name in YouTube, you'll find a bunch of videos of him walking around with stacks of cash, showing off his cars and his insane watch collection. It's pretty easy to see that the guy is filthy rich. Now, on the flip side, let's look at somebody like Elon Musk, who's currently one of the wealthiest people in the world. He doesn't have a massive car collection. He doesn't walk around with large stacks of money, and he doesn't wear expensive jewelry. As a matter of fact, not only did he sell his entire $100 million real estate portfolio, but homie now lives in a $50,000 boxable home that he rents from SpaceX. If I didn't know any better, I think homie is really going through it, but he's not, and the guy is still worth billions of dollars. See, there's a reason why we're able to look at somebody like Floyd and come to the conclusion that the guy must be rich, and it's because of our own reliance on people's outward appearance. But what if we saw Elon walking down the street and we didn't know who he was? We'd have no way of knowing that the guy's a billionaire. And that's because real wealth is what you don't see. It's the exotic cars he's not driving, the jewelry he's not wearing, the cash that he's not showing. And by no means, am I trying to hate on Floyd or anything like that. I'm sure the guy has the money, but the point is that true wealth is the financial assets that haven't been converted into the things you can see. And that's why it's so much easier for us to, imitate people who are rich versus those whose wealth we can't see. One of the things that I've always found ironic though is how we're so conditioned to spend our money frivolously while the most wealthy billionaires that we often look up to do the complete opposite. For example, Warren Buffett still lives in the same exact house that he mortgaged in 1958 for $45,000. And for the longest time, he was still driving the same Cadillac DTS he bought new in 2006. And the only reason he sold it is because his shareholders were so, worried about how the car affected his image. And again, we have Elon Musk, who still lives in a $50,000 box. So to me, at least, it's pretty clear that if building wealth is a priority, then we should probably learn to imitate the behavior of those who are wealthy instead of trying to keep up with those who are constantly spending their money frivolously. So what if I told you that some of the best examples of smart financial behavior could actually be found in a Las Vegas casino? Personally, I've never been to a casino and I certainly don't condone gambling your hard-earned money, but it would seem that there is a valuable lesson to be learned from blackjack players who practice the art of counting cards. And that lesson is the importance of having margin of safety. The thing about blackjack players is that they totally understand that the game they're playing is a game of odds and not certainties. Therefore, they only bet more when they feel that the odds of getting a card that they want is in their favor, and they bet less when they feel that the odds are against them. The whole strategy relies entirely on humility. The humility that they don't know and can't possibly know exactly which card will be played next. Even though the whole strategy itself has been statistically proven to work, what isn't guaranteed is that they'll win on every single hand. And because of that, there's never a moment when they think that they're so right that they'd be willing to bet all of their hard-earned money. In an interview with Benjamin Graham, who was Warren Buffett's mentor, he said that the purpose of having a margin of safety, or in other words, room for error, is to render forecasting unnecessary. Let's face it, at the end of the day, none of us really like dealing with uncertainty. We all want to know what's going to happen next, what our annual returns will look like, when interest rate will come back down, when we'll be able to retire. Not knowing some of these things makes us anxious and uncomfortable. And that's because we're not really built to cope with uncertainty. So the thing that Morgan suggests, which I agree 100% with, is that we should start embracing this idea of having room for error, because when we do, it's going to give us the ability to endure a range of potential outcomes. And it's also what's going to let us, stick around long enough for a low probability outcome to work out within our favor. So the main point here is survivability. By incorporating, room for error into our strategy, we'll not only sleep better at night knowing that whatever happens, we've got a margin of safety in place, but it's also what's going to allow us the ability to remain standing long enough for our risk to pay off. So let's quickly recap these 6 takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is to remember to think twice before judging somebody else's financial decisions, because no matter how crazy it looks, just remember that we all come from different backgrounds and have experienced different things in life, and those things have shaped our own financial perspective. So for takeaway number 2, we have to remember that in order to reap the full benefits of compounding, we have to think long-term and give our investments enough time to ride out any major volatility in the market. Takeaway number 3 is to save as much money as possible, even if you don't think you have a reason to. We live in a world that that is unpredictable. So we should save in order to hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise us at the worst possible moment. So for takeaway number 4, remember that nothing is free. Everything comes at a cost. So if you want the high returns, then you have to pay the price. And that price is uncertainty and volatility. Takeaway number 5 is wealth is what you don't see. If building wealth is important to you, then start modeling those who aren't spending their money frivolously. And takeaway number 6 is to have a margin of safety, because obtaining wealth requires taking risk, and we should make sure that the risk that we take doesn't completely ruin us if we're wrong. We need to be able to survive long enough for that risk to pay off. So those were the 6 biggest takeaways that I got from reading this awesome book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. If you haven't read the book yet, I definitely recommend checking it out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.